In 1968, 44 people would die in 2 helicopter crashes within 3 months in regularly scheduled flights from the Disneyland Heliport to the Los Angeles International Airport. How did 2 flights crash within months of each other? Come explore these bizarre tragedies and the events that led up to them. This is the Imagination Files. To understand how these horrible tragedies happened, we have to go back and understand how this service came to be. Los Angeles Airways, LAA, was a helicopter airline founded by Clarence Bellin in October of 1947. The Westchester-based company serviced airports in Southern California. It started out as an airmail service when it was founded, as you can see from this photo of the Sikorsky S-51 taking off for the inaugural airmail flight from the roof terminal of the Annex Post Office. It wasn't until November of 1954 that it would begin passenger service. When it did, it was the world's first scheduled helicopter airline, with its main hub being Los Angeles International Airport, or LAX. Passengers could be flown back and forth from a few different heliports in the local area, including Disneyland, Newport Resort in Newport Beach, and would later expand to Ontario and San Bernardino. The heliport and service to Disneyland started in 1956, with the heliport being located just southeast of Tomorrowland, as you can see here. It would then be moved about 140 yards to accommodate the expansion of the Disneyland Railroad. The final location of the helipad would be adjacent to the Disneyland Hotel in what is used today as the parking area for downtown Disney, as you can see by these pictures. The flight between LAX and Disneyland took about 15 minutes and was about 25 miles. There were approximately 30 flights between LAX and Disneyland made daily. Increasing its fleet by acquiring 4 Sikorsky S-61 helicopters in March of 1962, LAA was granted a permanent certificate to continue scheduled passenger airline operations throughout the Los Angeles area. LAA receiving this certificate and authority from the Federal Aviation Administration to conduct flights under instrumental flight rules gave them the ability to operate at night and in poor weather conditions. The Civil Aeronautics Board would then end the approximately $4.3 million per year in subsidies for LAA due to them thinking that commercial helicopter service was no longer a viable form of transportation. LAA would then consider acquiring the Sikorsky S-64 Sky Crane that you can see here had a detachable passenger section. They would be unable to obtain financing for the acquisition and would ultimately then suffer the 2 fatal accidents that we're going to talk about when they were unable to make a deal with Golden West Airlines in which Golden West would buy LAA. They would then end operations in 1971 after 24 years in service. Now that we know the background of the service that LAA provided and that one of the helipads they serviced was Disneyland, we can delve into the accidents themselves. The first accident would occur on Wednesday, May 22, 1968, around 5:50 p.m. and about 10 minutes into its flight. It was clear weather, and Flight 841, a Sikorsky S-61 helicopter with 3 crew members, would pick up 20 passengers from the Disneyland Heliport near Disneyland Hotel at 5:37 p.m. With a quick turnaround of only 3 minutes, the pilot stayed in the cockpit and they only turned off the number 2 engine while the passengers boarded. The aircraft would not be serviced at the heliport, but made normal radio contacts, with crew giving no indication of any difficulties with the aircraft, and witnesses noted nothing unusual about the flight. It would then begin on its normal course to LAX to drop the passengers off at the airport at 5:40 p.m. The flight would then give 2 reports to the Fullerton Tower. At 5:42, they advised their route of flight, and at 5:47 gave a position report. Both of these reports are considered routine. Around 5:50 p.m., Flight 742 passed Flight 841 and reported that the aircraft was heading west, on course, and appeared completely normal. It's reported that 30 to 60 seconds later, a pilot on board Flight 742 and Los Angeles Flight Control heard a transmission that they determined to be, "LA, we're crashing, help us!" Witness observations say that during the final 2 to 2.5 miles of its flight, Flight 841 had descended from its 2,000-foot cruising altitude observed by Flight 742 to between 600 to 800 feet above the ground. They also indicated that the aircraft slowed and that there seemed to be an erratic action of the main rotor blades. One of the witnesses had a helicopter maintenance background and described the aircraft make a left turn from a westerly direction to a southwesterly, and that it was a violent yaw to the left of nearly 90 degrees. He also reported seeing the main rotor blade extremely out of track on the right side. Right after that, the witnesses say that there were several sharp sounds from the aircraft, and 2 of the witnesses saw the main rotor blades striking the front and back areas of the aircraft fuselage. Parts of the main rotor blades, fuselage, and tail rotor were seen falling off the aircraft, and the helicopter went into a near vertical freefall and burst into flames upon impact with the ground, killing all 23 passengers on board. Falling pieces of the helicopter damaged several nearby buildings, and a truck and the main fuselage and most of the wreckage landed in a dairy farm. The investigation revealed that the center of gravity limit and gross weight limits were all within their limitations. The accident report states that the accident sequence began while the aircraft was in cruising flight of about 2,000 feet above the ground and about 2 miles east of the accident site. According to the investigation, the black, yellow, and blue main rotor blades, followed by the red and white blades, underwent a series of extreme overtravel excursions in their lead lag axis. It then goes on to describe that due to the yellow main rotor blade overtraveling in the lead direction, it caused the pitch change control rod to be subjected to downward and rearward loading forces that were many times its designated operating strength. This caused the rod to become detached from where it was attached to the lugs to the main rotor rotating swash plate. This then caused the other rotors to collide and become detached. They would then strike and penetrate both the forward and aft portions of the aircraft. This separated major portions of the fuselage, including the tail rotor pylon and tail rotor assemblies. Due to a distinct difference in the damage to the yellow blade, it was determined that the yellow blade inflicted no damage to the fuselage or cockpit areas, and that it was neither in its position between the blue and white blade, and that it wasn't in the rotation disc at all at the time of the blade striking the helicopter. The helicopter then became completely uncontrollable and crashed in a near vertical descent as described by the accident report. Investigators believed the cause to be the loss of the main rotor blade damper integrity, which cushions and limits the motion of the blades. They believed this originated with either the black main rotor blade damper or a loss of effective damper action by the white main rotor blade damper. The reason they believed this to be the cause was due to the important portions of the black damper and a portion of the black blade horizontal hinge pin to which the damper attaches not being recovered. Major portions of the aircraft, including the aft part of the fuselage, tail rotor drive shaft, and the pylon assembly, including the intermediate gearbox, tail rotor assembly, pieces of the main rotor blades, and pieces of the cockpit and fuselage structure, were all found along the ground path approximately 1,100 feet wide and 2,100 feet long, farther back along the flight path, and showed no evidence of fire, indicating they fell off along the final flight path of the helicopter. Due to the complexity of the crash, the rotor head, rotor blades, and stationary and rotating swash plates were taken to the facilities of the aircraft manufacturer for examination and failure analysis that resulted in over a year of test and research. It was determined that the fractures occurred from overloading. Safety measures were added, including reducing the life of the horizontal hinge pins from unlimited to 5,000 hours, and a service bulletin to all operators requesting them to check all the main rotor blade dampers for proper torque of the screw and fittings of the damper piston to the damper trunnion and bumper or shock absorber. This was the worst collision in U.S. history until 1986, when there was a mid-air collision at the Grand Canyon that killed 25. Only 84 days later, on August 14, 1968, another LAA helicopter accident would occur. Flight 417 would begin the day about 6:07 a.m. and completed 3 round trips around the greater Los Angeles area before landing at Los Angeles International Airport. The day was described as clear weather with a small amount of wind. 3 crew members, including the former USMC helicopter pilot Captain Kenneth Lee Wagner, would pick up 18 passengers. The trip would be the opposite of the one 84 days before, where they would be heading to the Disneyland Heliport near the Disneyland Hotel. Flight 417 would depart the ramp at LAX at 10:26 a.m. After being cleared for takeoff, the aircraft would head eastbound at around a 1,200-foot cruising altitude around 10:28 a.m. The last known contact of Flight 417 came after air traffic control advised LA 417, 7 miles east, radar service terminated, and Flight 417 responded, 417, thank you. Witnesses reported to investigators that Flight 417 was following along a normal flight path between 1,200 to 1,500 feet before they heard a loud noise coming from the helicopter and saw one of the rotor blades separate from the main rotor disc. As the helicopter fell in variously described gyrations, the tail cone folded or separated from the helicopter. The helicopter ended up crashing in Loiters Park in Compton. Most of the wreckage of the helicopter was contained to the park except for the yellow rotor blade and some of its parts, which were located about a quarter of a mile northwest of the main wreckage site. There were 91 witnesses to the accident. The accident report states that the safety board determines that the probable cause of this accident was the fatigue failure of the yellow main rotor blade spindle, causing separation of the blade, which made the aircraft uncontrollable. Investigation revealed that the origination of the fatigue crack was in an area of substandard hardness and inadequate shot peening. The company that had shot peened the spindles for Flight 417 reportedly used a manual machine due to the fact that it was loaded with 170 shot, whereas the automatic machine that was big enough to service the spindle was loaded with a smaller shot. They found that it was done in accordance with specifications, though. In November of 1966, during a fifth overhaul of the spindle and 3 others, they determined that the fretting of the nickel plate was due to the insufficient hardness of plating and recommended that the spindles be reworked in accordance with the previously provided engineering instructions. These 4 spindles and a 5th that wasn't plated yet were shipped to Sikorsky for salvage. The repair order outlined that they were supposed to be stripped of the previous nickel, replated and grinded, nickel sulfamate plated, and shot peened with 170 shot. At some point, the requirement to shot peen had been deleted from the work order, so it was not done. This was due to the appearance of already being shot peened and there being no requirement to shot peen something twice. According to the Chief Quality Assurance and Reliability for Sikorsky Aircraft, it is not uncommon to get an order in from a customer with requirements that are not required. They then moved on to the nickel sulfamate process. Finally, there was a 6th overhaul of the spindle in June of 1968 by LAA. No cracks were detected during the Magnolo inspection that had been conducted. The spindle would then be installed on Flight 417 and remain there until the accident. According to the accident report, the fracture was of a type generally described as a high-cycle, low-stress fatigue fracture. The crack appeared under stresses that were well below the gross yield strength of the steel. It was also believed by investigators that the crack was present during the Magnaglow inspection that had been conducted during the last overhaul of the spindle. The equipment used should have been able to detect a crack of 1/100th inch in length under the plating as thick as the spindle was. It is unknown why the crack wasn't discovered. The steel used for the plating was also softer than specified in the spindle manufacturing drawing. Due to a lack of uniformity in the distribution of certain constituents of the steel, and the segregation of these elements in the ingot from which the spindle was manufactured affected its response to heat treatment and resulted in hardness readings as low as 28 on the Rockwell C scale, where it should have had a range of 34 to 38. The accident report found that incomplete shot peening undoubtedly was an important factor because the peening had not been effective in the critical area of the shank/fork fillet where the fatigue crack originated, and that adequate shot peening would have extended the fatigue life of the spindle. During testing, it was found that spindles that were salvaged and not shot peened had a fatigue life of 1/5 to 1/10 of that it should. It was also found that LAA failed to use plating of proper hardness in the initial salvage of the spindle, but it was replaced with proper plating at some point, so they determined it didn't have an impact on the accident. Investigators did conclude that Sikorsky deviating from their customers' instructions and not following their own written procedure by not shot peening the spindle did have a direct impact on the accident. The victims of both accidents were generally returned to their families for burials in their respective hometowns. Most people don't realize that there was a round-trip helicopter service between Disneyland and LAX, and that there were 2 tragic accidents that happened on this route that resulted in the death of 44 people. Through these tragedies, we have gained better insight into processes and procedures that needed to be improved to stop something similar from happening again. While this helicopter route no longer exists, it will always be remembered for being one of the most deadly accidents of its time.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe, and comment on something you'd like to see me cover in the future.